showing we don't need roads.
I'm going to jump into this. I got 1,000 questions for you. There's a really small, quiet moment in this movie that I love, but it's really one of the most powerful moments of any movie this year. And it's a moment when a woman is getting a promotion instead of her boyfriend. And instead of celebrating, she says, "I'm sorry." And I am sort of curious, what does it say about the relationship between men and women that her reaction to success is not excitement, it's apologetic, it's fear in a way?
It's total fear. For me, what I was trying to say there is this idea that, I still feel that even in a post Me Too era, there's still this feeling that a woman being big, makes a man feel small, and that, while a man's success is always a win for the relationship, when it's the other way around, it feels like a threat. And that's the reason why I made this movie, because I wanted to show how much hold these ingrained power dynamics still have over a relationship. Especially today when we're in a climate where anyone's afraid to say anything and confront things, that they feel they might be, looked at or judged as backwards or antiquated, but I just, apparently, especially with like the character of Luke, I wanted to show that he represents a certain generation of men kind of caught in the middle between wanting to adhere to a modern feminist society, but still having been raised on traditional ideas of masculinity.
Speaking of Luke, this next question might be a strange one, but right before I watched Fair Play, I had just rewatched Taxi Driver, which I watch about once a year. It's one of my all-time favorite movies. And that is, in part, it's a movie about a man and his relationship with women and his convincing of himself that he's the good guy, he's the hero, but he's not. So I understand that these are very different movies, and while they're very different circumstances, I do think that there are some interesting through lines between Travis Bickle and Luke. And I'm sort of curious if you agree, and potentially what that might say that we can sort of study men in film over time, and over 50 years, that there are still a lot of very similar behaviors, especially in regards to women.
I mean, I'll say I can't speak, specifically for Taxi Driver, even though it's also one of my favorite films. But I would say, in terms of, I think we're having a crisis. There's a crisis of masculinity, and especially in this country, I think that we're at this kind of inflection point where we're having, women in many ways are starting to surpass men in education and the workplace, and it goes against a lot of how people were raised, and I think that because of that, a lot of people don't know how to deal with that. Then the reason why they don't know how to deal with it is because they can't even acknowledge that that's what's really going on. It's like, I don't blame Luke or, or any of these men for having these feelings. I think this is a societal systemic problem that raises boys to believe that masculinity is an identity, when it's not, it's an energy. But between the boys we raise knowing this and a world moving away from that truth, there's a whole generation of men caught in the middle, men like Luke.
Which I think is fascinating. I'll cut you loose on this. I've always thought that a good movie makes us think about the characters, but a great movie can sort of make us think about ourselves. So I am sort of curious, what sort of internal questions do you think that this is going to cause within people? What sort of conversations do you think, or do you hope, or maybe sometimes it might even be afraid, are going to come out of people watching this movie?
I mean, I hope that, it starts a conversation and a debate. And, I think there are definitely some questions that I would like to put out there, which were some of the same questions that drove me to writing the script in the first place, which is, how can we dismantle the link between female empowerment and male fragility? How can we demystify the role that men are raised into thinking they're supposed to fill? And how can women learn to embrace their successes without fearing that it'll hurt them on some level? And ultimately, how can we love and trust each other in a world that's so dependent on these ingrained power dynamics, which get in the way of that love and trust and respect?
For sure. This is such a great movie, and it's so hard to squeeze everything I want to talk about this movie into a 5-minute junket slot. So thank you for taking the time. Thank you for being patient. Thank you for putting up. I know my Taxi Driver question was weird, but I was like, it was just a weird companion piece. But seriously, thank you for taking the time. I appreciate you.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
We don't need roads.